What's up, preppers? Welcome back to another video. This one, we're going to talk about the government 3-day plan for rolling blackouts. This is not something they're implementing straight away, so there's no attempt at fear-mongering here. But the fact that this plan has been in place for quite a while, and now we are starting to see global conflict that could affect our energy imports, I feel that it's more relevant than ever. So let's take a closer look at this on the government site. The use of emergency powers. I will link all the documents I'm citing below. It states on point 3.1 of the document I'll link, in an electricity supply emergency, it may be necessary to restrict customers' consumption of electricity. Restrictions over the longer term can be achieved by one or more of the following methods: public appeals by the government, orders or directions under the Energy Act 1976 requiring restrictions on consumption by industry, commerce. So having shops close sooner, having factories go to a 4-day working week is the potential options there. And directions under the Energy Act 1976 and the Energy Act 1989 requiring rota disconnections and associated restrictions. This is what we're going to look at further. The variable rota disconnection plan. This is an actual plan in place with the government. So this utilizes the variable rota disconnection plan, or VRDP, as we'll refer to it going forward. The format of which is outlined by the government in this document. The VRDP is intended to ensure the availability of supplies for electricity for emergency services and vital services. The VRDP divides non-protected sites in a network The VRDP divides non-protected sites in a network operator's license area into 18 groups of near equal demand. For the purposes of ESEC, which is the Electricity Supply Emergency Code, these groups are referred to as load blocks. Supply to these load blocks is sequenced for rota disconnections in the VRDP. It sets out the nominal 3-hour disconnection periods. For example, 8 periods in a 24-hour day, and respects to the need for equality and treatment between non-protected sites as far as responsible and practical. So they split up the day into 3-hour periods, so 8 periods throughout the day, and you might get a letter saying you're turned off between 2 p.m. and 5 p.m. or something to that end, or overnight potentially, so it's less damaging. The rota level and level of disconnection will be based on the shortage of supply during an emergency. If available supplies diminish, higher levels of disconnection will mean that increasing number of load blocks are disconnected in any one period. At levels requiring disconnection of up to 4 blocks, the VRDP is designed to concentrate the disconnection periods on the 3 days of Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, or Thursday, Friday, and Saturday for any one load block. So if it's going to happen to you, I think it's going to be 3-day stints, 3-hour periods. What does this mean as preppers? Obviously, we need to prepare for grid down and blackouts anyway. But this rolling blackout, this uncertainty of that, having your power cut off for 3 hours, you've got to consider your freezer food. It should last fine for a 3-hour period if the door remains closed. So do not open your freezer in that 3-hour period. Once the power's restored and the cooling starts to kick back in an hour later, open the freezer, check everything's all right that way. We have lots of essential things in the home that use electricity that we use every day, such as people will have electric ovens, electric hobs, things like that. So make sure that you have an alternative way to cook in that period. Ideally, you want to be running big power banks like EcoFlows, things like that. These can run quite good size electronics over a long period of time. There's loads of different channels reviewing this. I believe Scottish Prepper 73 himself did a review on the EcoFlows and said what you could run off it. So if you've got something like that, potentially you could have your fridge freezer plugged in during this period to keep everything cool and keep everything running as smoothly as possible. Generally, as preparers, we want to try and maintain a quality of life even through difficult times such as this. So a backup power source for many things is essential for something like this to sustain that living. Personally, for myself, I think I'll be looking more to mitigate the effects of the blackouts on my family directly: entertainment, eating, cooking, heating, things like that, but not based around just having a reserve power source, based around alternative ways of doing all of these things. So what's the actual risk of this going forward? Where's the UK energy come from? What potential threats are there? As it stands, activists such as Don't Just Stop Oil and people like that, as well as clogging up the roads, stopping you getting to work on time, their idea is obviously this net zero. It's to have no more drilling licenses for fuels and fossil fuels. Currently, UK is on 32% gas for the electricity supply, 29.4% wind, which I think is excellent in compared to the past, 14.2% nuclear, 5% biomass, 1% coal, 4.9% solar, 10.7% is imported, 1.8% is hydro, and 1% energy storage. Now, the surprising one for a lot of people there might be coal, because obviously we were a very heavy coal dependent country all the way up until the 70s, till they started closing all them coal mines. In fact, in 1970, 67% of electricity generation was through coal. By 2000, that had fallen to 35%. And by 2022, just 2%, and now we're at 1%. So coal is all but nearly gone. Is the wind making up for that enough? I don't think so quite at the moment. And why is that? Well, you can look at many graphs, and ideally I'll pop a couple different sources up on screen as we talk through this. But the energy imports since 1970 have massively increased. Yes, we do export some as well now, but the imports, especially for gas, has been massive. If not for our net imports of energy, then we'd be really struggling. We'd be having these blackouts now. And with a ridiculous goal of achieving net zero by 2030, we can only see this strain being more and more on top of our current power system unless they act right now and start building nuclear and alternative energy power plants that can sustain the load. Last March, the government did say that they were going to build some gas-fired power plants to mitigate this risk, to help with this load. But obviously, the change of government since then means potentially that's not going ahead. I don't think the problem directly is building power plants to allow for the load bearing, but the fact that we could be cut off at imports at any time. We've seen attacks on the Nord Stream line, that gas line that comes across. Okay, so if any of that is cut off, if our imports are cut off, we are suddenly using way more than we can possibly produce. And there's no reserves, there's no backups, there's 1% of backups there. And we won't be able to build more nuclear plants in a matter of weeks to solve this. It takes time. So without that outside help and without that European import, whether that be through a cyber attack, through a direct attack, through spreading conflict across Europe, we'd suddenly be plunged into this system of power needs to be reserved for emergency services. That's when they'll be looking to implement the electricity supply emergency code, and that's where these 3-day blackouts could start to come in. Obviously, there's services that would be excluded from this, such as hospitals, emergency services, things like that. And there's no telling whether they'll go for businesses first or whether they will go for residents first. Personally, I think residents, because cutting a resident off for 3 hours a day once or twice a week can be seen as they're doing their bit. Cutting a business off directly affects our economy. Last year, energy imports boosted the UK energy security, but at a massive cost to the country. In 2023, we spent over £3 billion in import bills for energy. You only have to go back as far as 2020, when we were only spending £0.6 billion on imported energy. Just another black hole that all our tax funds are going into. It's not realistic to achieve net zero, and net zero is not a real thing anyway. We are not reducing our carbon emissions to net zero, we're exporting them. It's all right saying that we don't produce any carbon, but if we import just as much and shipping and things like that, then we are damaging the earth exactly the same amount. The ozone layer, the environment, doesn't care about the borders of your country. If we offshore our carbon emissions, we're still producing them carbon emissions. Hopefully, sense will prevail and we'll have some sort of realistic plan to boost the UK power grid and the power system and the power that's generated. Because as an island nation, to be so reliant on imported gas, imported electricity, imported fuels seems like it's a recipe for disaster. And another great reason to prep. Worth thinking about, and I will link the full documents below for the government site, and you can read through that yourself in great detail. Thanks for watching the video, guys. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye.